Hi, my name is Dr. Felucia, and I'm a licensed psychologist and owner of Skill Set Counseling, where I focus on the treatment of OCD, spiritual abuse, and cultural abuse. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about a topic within the domain of spiritual abuse, and that topic is known as spiritual bypassing. And so, what is spiritual bypassing, you ask? Well, sounds exactly like what the words are: spiritual bypass. It's a phenomenon that occurs in spiritual environments or pretty much anywhere where people are using spirituality to bypass the root of an issue. Okay, so a spiritual bypass is often an overused term or phrase or cliche with a spiritual overtone to it. And so let me give you an example. Let's say someone is dealing with the issue of grief, or they've lost someone, or just going through a really difficult time. An example of a spiritual bypass would be hearing something or hearing a response like, well, um, they're in a better place now, or all things happen for a reason. When you hear a spiritual bypass, it is using spirituality on a surface level to avoid the deeper, more challenging issues at hand. Basically, skipping over the root of the issue and throwing a nice spiritual blanket over a messy problem. That's what I see spiritual bypass as. And spiritual bypass is not, it's something that is seen in spiritually abusive environments. However, just because a spiritual bypass occurs doesn't mean that the environment in and of itself is spiritually abusive. Okay, so sometimes people can use a spiritual bypass because they feel at a loss. They don't understand what to say. Sometimes people lack the vision or the flexibility or the empathy to give a kind response when they haven't been through something themselves. Okay, so sometimes it's just someone's way of trying to be spiritual and look at things on a higher level when they don't have the answer. And sometimes people can even use spiritual bypass on themselves. Sometimes when people are in a really difficult or challenging situation and they're, maybe in shock, or they don't even really know how to cope, sometimes that spiritual bypass is their way of hanging on in the moment and just getting through until they're able to really deal with the spiritual issues at hand. And so spiritual bypass is not always done from a level of intention. It's not always done in spiritually abusive environments. It's not always done to harm. People can do this themselves. Sometimes it's just a way of dealing the best you can. Okay. And so that can happen with spiritual bypass, but I'm going to talk more about spiritual bypass when it occurs in spiritually abusive environments. Okay. And so oftentimes when people have experienced spiritual abuse, they will say that they've heard a spiritual bypass and it felt like they were getting a very pat answer, a trite answer, a superficial answer, or superficial response that they really couldn't argue with, right? And they felt that when they received that response, it was really missing the root of the issue, right? It wasn't getting to the heart of it. It wasn't dealing with things as they were. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of how that can occur in a spiritually abusive environment. So let's say someone is in they're going through a really challenging time. Let's say that they are experiencing abuse or mistreatment, either from somebody in the spiritual environment or someone from their family. And they go, either to a spiritual authority or someone in that environment telling them, this is what happened. And they're looking for either solace, comfort, or some sort of solution or a way that they can address the problem. A spiritual bypass will occur when they get a response such as like, you're supposed to suffer the way Jesus suffered, or, this challenge is only going to make your character stronger, right? And while those things may be true on the surface, it doesn't address the mistreatment at hand, right? If it's coming from another member of the environment that is abusing or harming someone else. Just because spirituality makes us stronger, or rather adversity makes us stronger, doesn't address the fact that somebody is harming somebody else. Okay. And when this occurs in spiritually abusive environment, if you go back to my videos, previous videos on spiritual abuse, one of the rules of the spiritually abusive system is that appearance always matters over authenticity. And for someone in that spiritually abusive environment to actually address the difficult behaviors that are going on, address that, wow, somebody in our system is mistreating somebody else, or someone in our spiritual environment is being harmed, it takes away from that perfect image, right? And so, and when people are in these abusive environments, they want to maintain that image of everything's good, everything's perfect, but oftentimes it doesn't, they're not willing to do the work getting in the mess of real people's everyday problems and situations. And sometimes when people give these spiritual bypass answers, they aren't equipped to deal with it. And what someone in a spiritually healthy environment would do is, even if they don't have the resources, maybe it's, out of their lane or something, they're going to support that person till they get the help they need. Telling someone who's being hurt, who is being abused, who's being mistreated, that your character is just going to get better and stronger as a result of the abuse is not addressing the problem at hand. You're not doing anything to stop what is going on, or look into it, or try to provide comfort or help or direction. And so that's really important to remember. In these spiritual abusive environments, appearance is usually valued over authenticity. That image is really, really important. And oftentimes people want to uphold that at all costs and turn an eye away from challenges and problems that they are either not equipped to handle or they don't feel equipped to handle. Okay. And I'm going to give you a personal example of how I heard a spiritual bypass used in a sermon. And so I heard this sermon where this pastor, it was, on the radio, but they were talking about Job. And they said, when Job lost everything, he worshiped God, and he said, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. So may the name of the Lord be praised. And this pastor said that for people who are going through grief or going through really difficult times, if your response is not like Job's, then there's something wrong with you. They basically were saying that you're not a good Christian if you don't respond the way Job did, right? And so that is kind of like a spiritual bypass, right? Even though Job did those things, what this pastor did not talk about, and this happens too in spiritually abusive environments where scripture and different things are taken in isolation and not in context. They didn't talk about how Job cursed the day he was born, how he talked about how he, didn't want to be alive anymore. He expressed his desire to die at some point in the book, and he also questioned God, right? And so oftentimes when people, who I've talked to who have been in spiritually abusive environments, they are criticized for the very thing that Job has done in the passage, or in the book. If you're interested in if you read through the book of Job, you'll see what Job did. And so this is another example of how spiritual bypass is used. It's basically saying, here's this big overarching spiritual concept, and telling you that, if you're not adhering to this, or you don't see things this way, then there's something wrong with you. Okay. And spiritual bypass is harmful because it bypasses the complete picture. It stays on the surface and refuses to go deeper. So while, what Job did was commendable, he trusted God, and yes, he worshiped God in the midst of his difficulties, that wasn't the only thing he did. And so the spiritual bypass did not give us a complete picture. It ignores the humanity of us as people, that yes, we go through difficult times. We don't know all the answers. Sometimes there are really painful things that we cannot explain, or we can't explain away, or we have difficulty grappling with. Okay. So what do you do if you've been spiritually bypassed, right? First of all, you'll know, because you feel like you're just, given this cliche, this trite term you've heard a bunch of times, and you don't feel like the root or the actual problem is being addressed. And while it's really frustrating, it can be, you can feel angry, you can feel sad and hopeless. I would not recommend getting into it with the person who is using the spiritual bypass on you. I look at spiritual bypass as something that reflects more about the person using it than the person receiving it. And so while it is not easy, don't take it as something to do with you. Instead, I would find another source of comfort or empathy. If you have a friend or a trusted source, or even an online community that can provide that sort of just a safe place to reflect, that would be great. Another thing you can do too is journal and really take time to journal those raw, painful, just challenging emotions that you're having. That's a great way to just process what you are going through. And then also don't neglect the spiritual. Spiritual bypass, when that occurs, it can kind of sometimes make people feel like they don't want to have anything to do with spirituality at the moment. But you can do both. You can embrace the larger overarching spiritual concept. Yes, I understand I'm going through a difficult time, and difficult times make my inner spirit stronger. And at the same time, not neglect the reality of the situation. When you journal, when you write down what you're going through, when you talk about it, it will help you sort out what you can address, what you can fix, and what you can't. And the stuff you can't fix, you've got to, leave that to the side and focus on what are some maybe small practical solutions that you can use to address the challenges you are facing in the moment. Okay. And so, for more information about how to deal with spiritual bypassing, spiritual abuse, or anything like that, I have links in the description box. You can go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, where you can book a free consultation to, talk with me, figure out how we can, how you can get resources and different practical solutions to help you through these challenging times that you're facing. Okay. So I hope that that is helpful for you. If you found this information helpful, please subscribe, hit the like button, and also comment below. I'd love to hear from all of you about what examples of spiritual bypass that you have experienced. When you hit the like button and you subscribe, it really helps get this information out to other people that can benefit. So I would love to hear from all of you in the comments, and I might even do a video on one of the comments that I receive in the comment section. Okay, so may your day be filled with peace and joy. Bye-bye.